All right, so good afternoon, scholars. This particular workshop, the title of this particular workshop is called Do Your Research. Do Your Research. And what we are talking about today is how it is that you write effective college level essays. And let me tell you why this is extremely important. One of the things that we hear professors talk most often about is the struggle that their students have with writing. And a lot of times students, when they write college level papers, they put in a lot of outside information without crediting the source. And many of them may be unaware that that is considered plagiarism, and that is the quickest way to an F. So today, what I want to talk to you about is how you can write college level essays, get great grades, and make sure that you include the kind of research that your professors are looking for. Okay? The research writing process. The research writing process. So when we talk about the research writing process, this is extremely important because when you get these paper topics, the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you identify what it is that you're being asked to do. And then after you identify what it is that you're asked to do, you also want to make sure that you understand or you comprehend the totality of the assignment that should be done. In most cases in college, what you're going to be asked to write are evidence-based papers. Evidence-based papers. Um, so I've got a couple of students in here. Can anybody tell me what an evidence paper is? Evidence-based paper is. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. I'm not going to put you on camera. But what is an evidence-based paper? All right, Fred, tell us. Okay, very good. Okay, so Fred said evidence-based paper is a paper written with a credible source. Very good. And so we want to make sure that as we're writing these papers, that we include sources that we can give credit to, because a lot of times students will find papers on the internet and they think because they found it on Google or some other website that they can automatically use it. But we do not know the basis of that source. So we always want to make sure that it is a credible source. So there are three stages in the writing process. There are three stages in the research writing process. There is the pre-writing, the writing, and the editing. The pre-writing, the writing, and the editing process. And I wish you could see my PowerPoint, but I'm going to put it in the comments for you guys to look at later on. But pre-writing, writing, and editing. Let me tell you why these are extremely important. Pre-writing is the phase where we're just kind of getting out our ideas. This is where we're sort of brainstorming, sort of thinking about the topic that our professor has given us, and we're trying to figure out what specifically we want to write about. Well, after we get done with that pre-writing is when we actually start writing. And one of the things, I'm going to give you a little bit, a tip that I think is going to be really, really helpful. One of the things that you always want to do when you write a research paper is you want to write the paper first and then go back and fill it in with your expert opinions, your facts, your statistics that kind of help you validate the points that you're already making. But the last stage of that is going to be your editing phase, your editing phase. Okay? So here we want to talk about understanding the assignment. How many of you have ever had an assignment and you thought to yourself, I'm still kind of confused as to what my teacher's asking me for? Show me, okay? All right? And so I had a couple of folks that said me, right? And so we've gotten to a place where a teacher gives an assignment and you think you understand, but when you get back to the room, you say, I'm not quite clear on what specifically they're asking me to do. And then you do what you think they're asking, and you get the paper back, and the grade is looking nothing like what you expected it to look for. How many of us has that happen to? Okay? And so what you always want to do, right? What you always want to do is you want to make sure before you start writing, right? When you first get the assignment, you got to ask questions. You got to ask questions. You got to ask specific questions about the how, the what, and the why. How am I supposed to do this? How long is this supposed to be? What exactly are you looking for? And why is this paper important? Like, what part of my grade is this going to count for? Those are very, very important questions that we need to make sure we're asking as we go through the paper writing process. Topic selection. So this is extremely important. So whenever your professors give out a topic, usually what they'll do is they're going to give you a long list or maybe even a short list, but they're going to give you a list of topics to choose from. What happens is what they're expecting for you to do is take that topic and create something very, very specific from it, right? So let's say, for instance, that I'm your English professor or your sociology professor, and I'm giving you a list of topics, and the topics may say something like poverty, racism, drug abuse, right? Well, there's no way that you can write a research paper about poverty. Poverty is too wide of a subject, it's too broad of a subject for you to simply title the research paper poverty, right? Same with drug abuse, racism. So what your next move needs to be is to create for yourself what is called a working title. How many of us know what a working title is? Okay, you want to tell us, sir? Okay, I like it. I like it. Somebody else? What's a working title? Fred, you look like it's on the tip of your tongue. You want to help us out? Okay. So Fred is my good student, so I'm thanking him today. But a working title essentially is the very specific nature of what you're going to talk about, right? So let's say, for instance, if I chose the topic of poverty, right? That's too broad of a subject for me to write this 10 to 20 page research paper or even an essay. So I might narrow that down by saying, by calling the paper "The Effects of Poverty on Learning Capabilities of Black Students." That's very, very specific, right? But it also takes a stance. Because whenever you write a paper, whatever the paper should always take a stance on the topic. A stance meaning this is what my opinion is about this particular issue. So when I said poverty, what did I say my title was again? Okay, there we go. The effects of poverty on the learning capabilities of Black students. Well, that's very, very specific. So what I'm telling you, my stance is, I'm telling you that I believe that poverty affects the way that students are able to, Black people or Black students are able to learn. Well, that may be slightly controversial because somebody else may say, well, I don't think so. I don't think poverty has anything to do with the way students learn. Okay? So whenever you write a paper, you need to always make sure that it has a clear stance, right? And stance means your opinion on the issue. Now, where I see a lot of students mess up is they make their opinion be in first person. A scholarly paper should never be written in first person. You said, well, Dr. Hall, what does that mean when you say a scholarly paper shouldn't be written in first person? Meaning that I should never write a paper where it says, I think, I feel, I believe, in my opinion, I will show you how. A scholar should always write a paper from an objective point of view. The $1 million question. What's the $1 million question? What is objective? Objective means personally removed, right? Give me an example of what that looks like. Let's say that we are debating an issue. Somebody give me a controversial issue.
Feminism.
You say feminism?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a topic, but give me something specific about feminism.
Radical feminism in the eyes of the political arena. Yes.
right?
That's the basic.
That's
That's
still kind of a broad topic. I'll tell you where I would go with this if we talk about feminism, right? My topic may be is that feminism is not for Black women. Okay? That's radical, it's controversial, I'll tell you why. Because in the eyes of non-Black females, feminism is about fighting for the rights of women. But historically, Black women have always understood that when we talk about the issue of feminism, we're not talking about issues that are effectual to Black women. The whole feminist movement started because white women were lacking certain virtues in terms of not being able to work outside of the home, not being able to own property, and a lot of other issues. However, for Black women, we were both Black and female at the same time. So we had two very, very connected issues that could not be separated. And so we always had to work because our per capita income was always less than white folks. So that was never an issue for Black women fighting for the right to work outside of the home. They had to work. In fact, in the state of North Carolina, Black women who had husbands who made enough money to allow them to work at home were forced to work outside of their home because white people didn't like the fact that Black women could stay at home and work. So feminism was never an issue that was effectual to Black women. That would be a very controversial paper, but it also would be very, very specific because I'm telling you my stance. Is everybody still following? So now what I want to do, because I've chosen that stance and I got this working title, because anywhere along the lines, my title can change a little bit. My subject is going to remain the same because this is where students get it twisted. Because a lot of times when you tell them the title is unclear, they come back to you with a totally different subject and the teacher's like, no, I'm not going to accept that. Because what they're looking for you to do is fine tune what you already got instead of starting over. Because starting over means that you haven't really put in the research necessary to clarify what it is you're talking about. Everybody still following? So what they're asking you to do when they say, I want you to look at this more, is not change the subject, but I want you to work the title a little bit more to make this clear what it is that you're going to be talking about in your paper. And contrary to popular belief, almost every essay that you're going to write is going to have an argumentative topic. Nobody's really looking for an informative essay. What's the question you think I'm looking for? Why would they not be wanting an informative essay, Dr. Hall? Does anybody know why your teacher wouldn't want an informative essay? They want to hear your point of view. Okay, I love it. Why would they not be looking for an informative essay? Because most of these subjects they already know about, right? I give you an example. When I was still in the classroom, I thought if I heard one more essay about why weed should be legalized, I was going to play in traffic. If I read one more essay about abortion, I was going to do something real bad to somebody. Okay? And what those essays would always do is tell me everybody knows what abortion is. Everybody knows about laws that are trying to legalize marijuana. As a college student, what we're looking for from you is scholarship, not just random information. Make sense to us? Okay? You say, Dr. Hall, what is the difference between scholarship and random information? Scholarship means that we're looking for you to create your own paradigms, your worldviews that are based on knowledge and information. We're not looking for you to just regurgitate something that you read. Because just because you're able to regurgitate what you read does not mean that you understand. Everybody still following? So the whole impetus of you learning these new things is because we're trying to make sure that you comprehend and you're able to apply. That's what knowledge is. Knowledge is learned application. Because anybody can read something, that doesn't mean they understand. We're still following? So that is what your research paper is meant to do. It shows that not only have you learned some new information, but you're able to apply what you've learned and have an informed opinion about it, right? Tell you why this is important, especially for you as scholars in training. How many of us have ever been in a conversation with somebody and they used a bunch of jailhouse words and the big words, and you knew that they had no particular context for what they were talking about? He was like, or you were talking to your grandparents sometime, right? And we love grandma and granddad, but sometimes we know they can get on a tangent and we thinking, what are they talking about? I'm so sick of talking about the news, right? And so even though the news is, the news is current, we also want to make sure that we're reading for ourselves so that we can have an informed opinion. Everybody still following? Okay? So as you're reading this information, I want you to do a couple of things with me. The first thing that I always want you to do as you read is what is called dialogue with the text. Who can tell me what it means to dialogue with the text?
You have a conversation, unpack the sentences, and really break down what the author is trying to convey through this little song. Because, yeah.
That was good, Delonte. I like that. Somebody else want to add to it? What else does it mean to dialogue? Because he gave us a really good answer. When we dialogue with the text, what are we doing? Yes, ma'am. We're interacting with it, right? So you both gave me some really good answers, okay? So I'll give you an example of what that looks like. I remember, I think it was my first semester of grad school, right? We had to read this paper called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I've never forgotten that particular text, right? We read an excerpt from it, and later on I went back and read the contents of the book, right? But what threw me was when I first got it, I had no idea what pedagogy meant. I was like, I'm supposed to read, I don't know what this means. I knew what oppressed meant, but I didn't understand what pedagogy was, right? But I was always the kind of student that whenever I would read, and I would have a dictionary and a thesaurus on hand. The mistake of many students is when they see things that they don't understand, they stop reading. You always have to make sure that you're an engaged reader. And as an engaged reader, you always want to define things that you don't understand. You want to highlight information, and you want to ask questions about the text. Why is it that the author is saying this here? Why does the author keep repeating this particular set of information? Because what that does is that helps give you a greater understanding of what you're reading. And this is really, really important when you're researching, because the basis of your research paper is going to be holistically your opinion. The research or the evidence that you include is simply a matter of validating your opinion. Everybody still following? Okay. What does it mean, somebody, to validate an opinion?
Oh, you support a statement with evidence and proof through data, facts, statistics, triangulation. You also do it by paraphrasing and quotation.
Okay, very good, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. I love it. I love it. Thank you, fellas. Okay. So, but I want to give you what that looks like in terms of when you're doing your research, right? So there are three types of evidence. That's not what I have up here now, because I don't like talking directly from the PowerPoint. I hate when people do it, because I can read and you can read too, right? So there are three types of evidence. There are facts, statistics, and expert opinion, right? Not everything is a fact. Everybody still following? But there are three types of evidence that we can use. It's facts, statistics, and expert opinion. A fact is an indisputable truth. Okay, it's an indisputable truth. Before you now is it's a fact that I'm a black woman. I'm black, I'm a woman. It's a fact. Okay? Now, because of our history in this country, it may be disputable that there's some other things in my admixture. However, standing before you is somebody black and female. All right? That's a fact. It's an indisputable truth. A statistic, on the other hand, is a numerical analysis of an issue. A numerical analysis of an issue. It is not a fact, right? but it is a numerical analysis of an issue that helps point you toward a particular belief. It's a numerical analysis of an issue that helps point you toward a particular belief. So remember, I told you in the beginning that the working title for my paper was Poverty's Effects on Black Children and Their Learning Capabilities, right? So let's say, for instance, that I found a statistic that said something like 54%, and I'm making this up, okay? But 54% of African American children in poor school districts have very low test scores, right? Well, that statistic validates my point that poor children struggle in school. It is not a fact that poor children struggle in school. Is everybody still following? Does it make sense to you, the difference? But that statistic helps me sort of validate that point that I'm trying to make. Okay? So it's not a fact, but it helps me to validate because now I have some evidence that backs up what I'm saying. The last type of evidence is what we call an expert opinion. Who can tell me what an expert opinion is? Okay, yes, sir.
Somebody who's spent years studying how poverty affects children, education, somebody who's an expert in that field, and their opinion.
Come on, brother. I love it. I love it. Did everybody hear his answer? Okay. Did somebody else want to have something they wanted to add to it, or we'll stick with that? Okay. So that's a very good answer. So expert opinion means that this person is known to be someone who holds weight in a particular field. So let's say, for instance, we were studying racism and health inequities, right? And we talk about the mortality rate among Black women giving babies. So we know that it's a very real thing that a lot of times that Black women and Black folks in general are discriminated against within the healthcare system. It's a very, very, very real thing. So if we were to get some statistics, if we were to talk to a Black doctor, right, who worked in a hospital, or just a Black doctor in general, that would be an expert. Why?
They may have seen and firsthand experience how Black people are being discriminated.
Right, and he has years in medical field because even if he is a resident, he's going to medical school and now he has training in this particular field. So that's an expert, right? So let's say, for instance, if I were to write a paper about education and I use someone who is a teacher for 15 years, would that be expert opinion? It would, because that person has years of experience in this particular field and this was what they have been trained to do. So an expert is somebody who has been trained. So we couldn't necessarily use, well, you said, well, I talked to my mama about this. That's not expert opinion. That even though she may be an expert at being your mama, she's not an expert at this particular subject matter. Does that make sense to us? So we want to use somebody who is a credible source in the field of study that we're looking at, a specific field of study that we're looking at. Okay? Now, this is extremely important right here, right? The best websites for research. Best websites for research. Let me tell you why this is important, because a lot of times students will just Google something and they think, well, I'm just going to use this. We don't know where they came from, right? It's kind of like, have y'all ever ordered anything from back in the day when Fashion Nova was really, when they used to stalk us? Y'all remember that? And Fashion Nova was sending like 12 million emails, and you order something because you see it on the Instagram model, and they be like Fashion Nova or something, you get it, and it ain't giving what it's supposed to give. Y'all ever experienced that before? Okay? So just finding random sources on the internet is very much akin to that. We want to make sure that we use credible sources. And so these are a couple. So I want you to take a picture of this one. These are some sources that are extremely credible. So we have Google Scholar, JSTOR, Library of Congress, and most times when you find anything that ends in .edu, you found something credible. Because .edu usually means that it's come from an educational source. Okay, so be very, very Be very, very careful about the sources that you use. And also, to make sure that you're not plagiarizing, make sure that as you find these articles, you keep a bibliography or works cited page. And every time you use something, you put that source on a particular page, right? So that you can point back to it. And so, how many of you would be interested if we did like an MLA documentation workshop? Okay, so one person, we'll do that. We could do that personally. Okay, but an MLA documentation workshop. Because what happens a lot of times is that students will include outside information, and they say, well, Dr. So-and-so, I've included evidence, but when you didn't cite the evidence, right, and you just put it in a paper, that's plagiarism. Even if you, and he brought it up, Delonte brought it up earlier, paraphrasing. If you don't give credit to the source because it's not an original idea. If you don't give credit to the source, that is still plagiarism. You gotta give credit to the source. Okay? So we already kind of discussed the whole notion of a working thesis and a working title. A working thesis and a working title will simply mean that when the teacher gives that assignment and they're expecting for you to work on it during the course of however many weeks or however many days that they give you to work on it, you need to have something concrete to show them that you're working on. So that means that the title and the thesis statement, it can change a little bit, but it still needs to have that general subject area. So here, my working title is No Daddy, No Love, the Impact of Fatherlessness on Black Women, right? From that working title, what can you tell my paper's gonna talk about? Break it down, be a little bit more specific for me. Okay, and how they're affected by not having a father in their life. Okay, so that's a stance, isn't it? Because some people say, well, I ain't had no daddy and I wasn't affected. My mama wasn't my man. You know how to get them people. My mama wasn't my man and daddy, but we're talking about a missing link, right? So that's still my opinion. Everybody still following? Now, when I create a working thesis, my thesis needs to correspond to my title. That means that if that's my title, when my reader reads my thesis, it should always point back to the original subject area. So my working thesis would be something along the lines of, let me go to my next slide. My working thesis may be something along the lines of fatherlessness or fatherlessness has negatively affected Black women socially and psychologically. So that means that in my first paragraph, I'm going to talk about how it has affected them socially. In my next paragraph, I'm going to talk about how it's affected them psychologically. Now, where a lot of students run into the mistake, they don't know when to stop and start a paragraph, is you got to understand that even though those are my thesis topics, those are the two topics that came from my thesis, I can have what are called subtopics. Somebody tell me what a subtopic is. What's a subtopic? Okay, yes, sir.
Point where it's a point that is trying to prove your thesis. Because you said sociologically,
Socially and psychologically.
Yeah, so those are your main points. At some point, we're trying to like prove one of those.
Okay, very good, very good. So when I talk about how it affected them socially, next thing I might talk about the effects they have on their relationships, on their domestic partner relationships or marriage, right? So that's still under how it affects them socially. Now, as you're writing, right, I want you to make sure that you first you take that thesis and you create an outline for yourself, because the outline is going to help your paper stay on task and on topic. Because a lot of times what happens is when students just start free writing, their paper's all over the place and it's lacking structure. You think, oh man, I killed it. But when the teacher sees it, the first thing they're seeing is problems with structure. right? So we want to make sure that we have an outline because everything is going to be judged by its structure. We still have to follow the guidelines and the rules. Integrating sources. Whenever you integrate a source in a paper, so let's say, for instance, I found a statistic that corresponds to what I'm saying, or I found a fact, or this expert opinion, this quote from this expert that I want to use. I need to always explain what this thing means in context to what I'm saying in my paper. So I just can't put a fact in there or a statistic in there without explaining what that means to my overall point that I'm trying to make. I always have to explain what it means in the grand scheme of things. So when I get to the end of my paper, I want to make sure, and I'm kind of shortening this up, but I'm going to take everybody's email so I can send you the ebook, and you can use it when you write your papers in the future. I'm going to send this information to you, and I'm going to also send this out to your professors so that I can make sure that your professors are able to give you the extra credit, okay? And I thank you guys so much. You've been so sweet. This is my revision checklist. Somebody read the revision checklist for me.
Read the assignment sheet, underline the thesis, read aloud, label the topic of each paragraph in the margin, revise main ideas, consider clarity and relevance.
Okay? And so when I get to the end of my paper, I want to make sure that I've done all these things. We also want to make sure, right, when you're revising it for clarity, make sure that you're using standard grammar conventions. Let me tell you why this is important. Too often, because the language you write in, right, sometimes has a way of finding its way in the papers. I'll be even more specific for you. In the last couple of years, one of the things that I have found more often than not is that in the same way that students text to one another, that text language will find its way in papers. Not appropriate, not appropriate. And even though you may be saying something profound, we still have to stick to general conventions, right? Because one day you're going to be going to graduate school or becoming the CEO of your own company, and you have to be clear about your conventional grammar. And I'm not going to say, what's the word everybody loves to use, inappropriate. So some people like to think that they speak good English. Nobody speaks good English unless they speak the Queen's English, right? Most of us speak some derivative of the English language. And it just so happens that most of us, people of color, are bilingual because we speak Afrish. I'm not going to say Ebonics because I think it's a demeaning term, right? But we speak our cultural vernacular and we speak standard English at the same time, right? But we want to make sure that when we're writing papers, when we're writing emails and that sort of thing, that we're using standard English. And that same vernacular that we may use with our friends, we keep it outside. Does that make sense? Okay. So I thank you guys, and that is the end. I thank you for being wonderful participants. I'm going to email this to you. Come up before you leave and give me your email addresses so I can email you some helpful tips. And also send this out to professors saying who came, okay? You all have blessed my life today, I tell you.